For any of you who maybe weren't with us yesterday, I'm Jill Orum Dunbar. I'm one of the co-founders of the foundation and a part of the board. The next section of the conference is going to focus on continuing on this theme around patient-centric research and helping to use information and resources from among the patient community to guide and direct and contribute to the research that's being done. So the first thing that Corinne and I want to talk about is a pretty in-depth research review that she's taken the lead on with the help of several others. And then I'm going to jump back in and talk about the initial results that we've gotten from the crowdsourcing survey that we talked to you guys about yesterday. So I'm going to share my screen here, and we've got a few slides to take you through here. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see that. It looks good to you, Corinne?
Yeah, it looks great.
All right, awesome.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, quite well,
okay.
Thank you. I'll just take this first slide and then I'll turn it over to you. Just for a little bit of background here, this is something that we as a foundation, we've been thinking about for 2 or 3 years now. There's so much research that has been going on, especially it's been escalating the last several years in particular, thankfully so. And we really wanted to make sure that we as a foundation were making informed decisions about where we want to apply some of our funds, where do we want to help ignite kind of more areas of focus in terms of research. And so we've really been thinking about from the standpoint of like, you can't really know where you're going until you know where you've been. So we've had this idea in our heads for a while, and thankfully Corinne and a team of a few others have been generous with their time and energies and have helped us actually make an assessment of the research that's been done over pretty much the last decade. And so Corinne's going to talk about that and take us through what she's found.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jill. My name is Corinne Stobaugh, and I'm the parent of a 9-year-old boy with Kabuki syndrome, and I'm also a pathologist, which is a type of doctor that looks at human tissues and diagnoses disease. And I was super thrilled to have the opportunity to help out the Kabuki Syndrome Foundation by doing a scoping review. And a scoping review is basically a synthesis of the knowledge that's, there's different types of ways you can synthesize knowledge. As a doctor, we often deal with meta-analyses and systematic reviews, which are looking at a very narrow topic and sort of summarizing the literature on that topic to figure out how to maybe treat a patient for a certain disease. But a scoping review is appropriate when you have a very broad topic and you want to map the entire literature on a topic and summarize what's known, identify research gaps, and identify key concepts. And I definitely learned a lot doing this scoping review. Next slide. Sorry if I'm a little nervous. Like I feel like I'm presenting alongside these like rock stars in Kabuki syndrome. So it's such an honor to be presenting. So basically, we had the research question. Anytime you do any kind of research, you have to start with a question. And our question was, what topics does the published medical literature regarding Kabuki syndrome cover? Basic question, but the answers can be were a little bit difficult to find. Next slide. All right, so I am really lucky that I have a lot of resources available to me at the University of South Florida. We have an amazing medical library with amazing medical librarians. One of them that helped me, her name is Crystal Bullers, and without this would not have been possible. And she directed me to Web of Science, which is a database that can include searches on a lot of different databases. So together we built a search terms that will allowed us to retrieve all of the citations on Kabuki syndrome, excluding obviously a lot of citations on Kabuki theater, which we would love to learn about, but is not relevant for this scoping review. And also I wanted to also include citations on neurodevelopmental syndromes and also other epigenetic diseases to see if there were any parallels we could draw, like if they had any kind of breakthroughs in related diseases that we could also use in Kabuki syndrome. And next slide. Okay, so let's see, how can I close this? So the initial data returned over 900 individual citations, and looking through the body of literature written on Kabuki syndrome is really interesting because it kind of gives the story about how at first you're describing the gene and the mutations involved, and describing how the mutations manifest in patients, observing what happens when the mutations are in model systems, and utilizing this information to investigate possible treatments and figuring out how these genes work in the body and all the different tissues of the body. And I feel like we're kind of like in the latter part of that story, which is super exciting because then that means we're closer to a treatment. But first we had to categorize all this data. Next slide. So Web of Science is really a powerful tool because it not only searches databases, but you can, it has tools that will help you analyze the data. So on the left screen, you're seeing the Web of Science categories. Each article is categorized, I think with the article is uploaded. And so you can see all of the different topics in different colors and different size boxes. And that sort of generally relates to the number of articles that each topic represents. So of course, genetics is like really high up there. But I found that this tool was just not specific enough for what we needed to really figure out what topics are covered and what topics are not. Just general pediatrics, that's way too general for our purposes. And then on the right, you can see one of the interesting tools is also kind of enumerating the number of articles per year. So 2019 was a great year for Kabuki syndrome, and you can see that the research in Kabuki syndrome is just really ramping up. So that's also good news. Next slide. Okay, so how I did the scoping review is how I categorized all of the articles is, you can see all the categories here, right? And these are general categories. Each one has subcategories. And for each article, I categorized it twice. So for example, if you have an article that is describing all of the epigenetic syndromes that also have cardiac defects, well, do you categorize it as cardiology or do you categorize it as epigenetics? Well, I did up to 2 categories for each article. So that way I didn't have to choose, basically. And then it also gives a more comprehensive view of what is out there in terms of the topics available. So obviously genetics is going to be our biggest one because it's a genetic disease, right? And then fetal development, that has to do with sort of like the craniofacial development, like the development of the hippocampus, things that happen in utero, that kind of thing. So that was a very big chunk as well, because often children come to, their doctors at the beginning of life with problems, and that's where a lot of the case reports and stuff were. The second largest chunk is neurology, and that was really significant. We will go to the next slide, which shows sort of the subcategories within neurology. So the subcategories were developmental delay, kind of self-explanatory, sleep, PT, OT, speech and rehab services, seizures, neurobehavioral issues, hypotonia, and visuospatial. So, visuospatial is a kind of our kind of when I categorize these, sometimes visuospatial stuff was in basic research. This is just like visuospatial stuff in humans. So there wasn't as many articles on that as I would have expected. And then next slide. So I think the next slide, I'm going to hand it back over to Jill because this really meshes well with what we found in these surveys.
That's right. It definitely did. So from the crowdsourcing survey that we talked to you guys about yesterday, we've had it open for about a week or so. This is just a sampling of some of the preliminary results. We're actually going to leave the survey open a bit longer and continue to try to get more families completing it. We do have a sample of 89, which is pretty good for especially for a rare disease community. What we definitely saw, and we're going to focus just on the question we asked about which of these issues has a big impact on your daily life as someone with Kabuki syndrome or an immediate family member. And as you can clearly see, the top 4 issues were all kind of neuro related. And so we've color coded the bars here against some of the different body systems. But this was a clear signal that, this is something that a large portion of the population is experiencing and finding to be an important area of interest for them. And when we compared that back to the slide that Corinne was just showing us in terms of the breakdown in publications, it does kind of strike us. And again, we're still in the very early stages of really analyzing all of this against the body of research that is out there. But for being such an important area, we felt like, maybe there is still a lot more opportunity to explore various aspects of neurology, largely because, it's not like it's a single thing. There's all these different facets that relate to neurology. And we did notice that specifically, like if you look towards the bottom of the chart on the right, we see things like neurobehavioral, hypotonia, visuospatial. Those were all things that were cited as being, moderately or largely important to people. But yeah, there's very little in the research around those areas today. So, perhaps those are some, kind of drill sites for future research, something to be, considered at least. Corinne, you want to speak to this one?
Sure. Yeah, so in going through all of these articles, I, with my experience with my son and also reading about Kabuki syndrome, I was surprised that some of the things correlated pretty well, but some of the things I thought were, maybe didn't correlate as much with what we experience as caregivers. So, the GI issues were one of the things that was interesting because the functional GI issues are something that a lot of people have concerns about, like constipation, diarrhea, feeding issues, feeding tubes, that kind of thing. But the articles mainly were regarding structural GI issues, like, for example, things like a pancreatic duct dilatation and things like that were basically structural things that presented very early in life with problems, not functional things that we deal with on a daily basis. The bone disorders, I've heard a lot of issues with people having patellar dislocation. So I was expecting some articles on that, but really most of the bone stuff I saw was relating to bipartite clavicle. And then also I didn't see too much research on visual spatial issues, like how to help children with handwriting and things like that, or visual therapy for visual processing disorder. And so I think there's so many opportunities that we can pursue by looking at where we've been so we know where we can go.
Thanks, Corinne. So just to wrap up this segment and transition to a couple other related topics here. First of all, this was just kind of a sampling of some of the results. Obviously, we just gathered some of the data yesterday with the crowdsourcing survey. We would like to leave it open for maybe in the next couple of weeks. So if you have not already completed it, you definitely still have the chance to. You can use this QR code here. You can go to our website and our Facebook page, and we'll continue to post information there. So please do consider doing it if you haven't already, or share it with other people you may know. It literally takes about 5 minutes to do. In the coming days, we're going to do a little bit more a detailed and comprehensive analysis of this data. For instance, one of the things I'm really looking forward to diving into is kind of breaking down the data by different cohorts, looking at people with younger kids versus older kids. I know some people wrote notes yesterday and commented that, you know, their child might have had, you know, feeding issues when they were young, but not now that they're older. So we're going to examine some of the learnings from that standpoint. We will definitely be sharing this information ultimately with the Foundation's Medical Advisory Board for further input and discussion from them. And ultimately, what we really want to do, as was spoken to in one of the presentations yesterday, is to also you know, compare this information with patient registry data, so we can really form a complete picture of where are the greatest needs in terms of pursuing research that could lead to therapies that will make a meaningful difference in people's lives. And so with all of that information, as a foundation, we intend to use that to help guide future funding priorities, as well as helping to engage new researchers to Kabuki syndrome research. This is something that has always been one of our goals as a foundation, to kind of continue to expand that network. And now with the global collaborations that we're seeing happening across multiple institutions, we're really optimistic about that happening and being able to help influence that direction.